The billionaire humiliated his black cleaning lady in front of everyone at his penthouse party. She arrived like just another servant, and everyone was in absolute shock when they found out who she really was. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you are watching from. Hit the subscribe button if you are hooked in and ready to enjoy the story. The main room of Richard Halston's Manhattan penthouse exploded with uncomfortable silence when Angela Thompson was called forward from the kitchen. She stood holding her mop in her burgundy uniform, the white piping almost glowing under the recessed lights. But the atmosphere wasn't curiosity. It was pure, cruel anticipation. Richard Halston, raising his finger in accusation, declared to his elite guests, "Our trusted cleaning lady has betrayed us." For 3 years, Angela had cleaned every inch of that penthouse. Always invisible, always silent, watching the tech elites celebrate innovations they'd stolen while treating her like furniture. The accusation came without warning. Richard claimed she'd stolen a watch, framing it as a teaching moment about integrity. His team was all, "I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but I need to address a serious matter." He paused for dramatic effect, his finger rising to point directly at Angela. "This woman has been cleaning my home for 3 years. Tonight, I discovered she's been stealing from me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phone cameras rose in unison, a forest of screens ready to capture what promised to be viral content. A woman in an emerald gown whispered loudly to her companion, "I knew we couldn't trust," while a man in a $1,000 tuxedo was already typing hashtags. Richard produced a velvet box from his pocket with theatrical flourish. Inside sat a diamond-encrusted watch worth more than most people earned in a year. "I found this," he announced, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "Hidden in her cleaning supplies. A gift from my late father. Irreplaceable." The crowd's murmurs swelled into a wave of condemnation. Angela's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained eerily calm, a composure that flickered across Richard's features for just a moment before his arrogance steamrolled forward. 3 days ago, she'd been cleaning his home office when she'd seen him place that watch in her supply cart. She'd watched through the reflection in his computer screen, her hands never stopping their rhythmic wiping of his mahogany desk. The same desk where she'd photographed documents detailing 5 years of corporate theft. The same office where she'd recorded him bragging about destroying that Thompson woman's pathetic little startup. He'd never once recognized her. To men like Richard Halston, cleaning ladies didn't have faces or histories. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Richard demanded, stepping closer with cruel confidence. Behind him, his wife Catherine smiled thinly, already composing the social media post that would frame this as their commitment to accountability. The guests leaned forward, phones recording, ready to watch a powerless woman break down in tears and beg for mercy they'd never grant. This was entertainment. This was justice. This was exactly what happened to people who forgot their place. Angela set down her mop deliberately, the white strands settling against the polished floor with a soft whisper. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed the burgundy fabric of her uniform, and looked Richard Halston dead in the eye. When she spoke, her voice cut through the room with surgical precision. "Before I respond, may I connect to your television, Mr. Halston?" The smirk vanished from Richard's face. The invisible years. 5 years earlier, Angela Thompson had walked into the glass-walled conference room of Halston Technologies with a laptop, a dream, and a revolutionary AI algorithm that would change everything. At 23, she wore her best blazer, the navy one her mother had bought her for graduation, and her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun. Her startup team sat beside her. Marcus, her co-founder, and 2 brilliant engineers who'd believed in her vision enough to work for equity instead of salaries. Sentinel AI learns adaptive problem-solving through dynamic neural pathways, Angela explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard as code cascaded across the projection screen. "It doesn't just process data, it evolves with it. Autonomous, self-improving, exponentially scalable." Richard Halston leaned forward, his eyes sharp with interest. His CTO scribbled notes furiously. They asked questions for 2 hours. Technical, probing, detailed questions about architecture and implementation. Angela answered every single one, her voice steady with the confidence of someone who'd built something extraordinary. "Brilliant work, Ms. Thompson," Richard had said, shaking her hand at the door. "We'll be in touch." The rejection letter arrived 3 weeks later. 2 sentences. "After careful consideration, we've determined Sentinel AI is not commercially viable for our current business model. We wish you success in your future endeavors." 6 months later, Halston Technologies announced OptiCore, the revolutionary AI system that would redefine the industry. Angela watched the press conference from her cramped apartment, her hands shaking as Richard demonstrated her algorithm, line for line, with minor cosmetic changes. Her algorithm. Her code. Her life's work, now worth $3 billion under someone else's name. She hired lawyers with money she didn't have. Richard's legal team buried her in motions, depositions, continuances, a judicial avalanche designed to drown her in debt. Her co-founders abandoned ship when the lawsuits started draining resources. Marcus took a job at Google and stopped returning her calls. The engineers scattered. Tech investors who'd once courted her suddenly had full calendars. The industry whispered that she was difficult, litigious, unstable. Her startup declared bankruptcy on a Tuesday. Her mother's heart attack came on a Thursday. Angela held her mother's hand in the hospital room as monitors beeped their final countdown. "I'm sorry, baby," her mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry I can't see you win." The stress of watching her daughter destroyed, of seeing their savings evaporate into legal fees, of knowing the system had crushed the brilliant girl she'd raised, it had been too much. The doctor said it was myocardial infarction. Angela knew it was grief weaponized into cardiac failure. She buried her mother on a Saturday and sat in the empty apartment on Sunday, staring at her laptop screen through tears that wouldn't stop. A notification popped up, job posting, cleaning staff needed for luxury Manhattan residences. Discretion required. Angela clicked the link, her jaw set with something that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite despair. It was calculation. 3 weeks later, she arrived at Richard Halston's penthouse for the interview, wearing a simple gray dress and carrying a resume that made no mention of MIT or algorithms or anything that might trigger recognition. Richard barely glanced at her face. "You start Monday," he said. He had no idea who she was. The long game. The first year, Angela learned to disappear. She scrubbed toilets while Richard's friends joked about the help 3 feet away, as if she were a lamp or a chair. She cleaned windows while they used words like "those people" and "diversity hires," and laughed at their own cleverness. She emptied trash bins filled with crumpled contracts worth more than her mother's funeral costs. Every day, she swallowed her rage and polished silver and became invisible. But invisible people see everything. The second year, Angela became a shadow with a purpose. When Richard left his office for lunch meetings, she had exactly 47 minutes. Her phone camera clicked silently. Patent applications with her algorithm signature architecture, emails discussing acquisition of Thompson IP, financial projections built entirely on stolen code. She'd installed a recording device inside a fake cleaning spray bottle. Richard never noticed the tiny microphone capturing every conference call, every whispered threat to competitors, every casual admission of corporate espionage. His assistant, Maria, became an unexpected ally. "You're too smart for this job," Maria said one afternoon, watching Angela reorganize Richard's files with unconscious efficiency. Over coffee breaks, Maria mentioned things: upcoming board meetings, investor concerns, Richard's paranoia about federal audits. She never asked why Angela wanted to know. Maybe she suspected. Maybe she just hated Richard too. The third year, Angela found FBI agent Marcus Chen. She'd compiled 300 pages of evidence by then, enough to prove systematic theft, fraud, perjury before the patent office. Chen listened to her story in a coffee shop far from Manhattan, his face carefully neutral. "This is solid," he finally said. "But we need more. Can you get access to his home computer?" She could. She did. Late one Tuesday night, while Richard hosted poker games in his living room, Angela cleaned his office. Her fingers flew across his keyboard, copying folders labeled Sentinel_Original and Thompson_Acquisition for Strategy. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. The files were downloading to her hidden flash drive when she heard footsteps. Catherine Halston appeared in the doorway, a wine glass in her hand, her expression unreadable. For 3 eternal seconds, they stared at each other. Angela frozen at the computer, Catherine perfectly still in her designer gown. Then Catherine's eyes flicked to the screen, to Angela's trembling hands, back to Angela's face. "The powder room needs attention," Catherine said quietly, and walked away. Angela never knew if it was kindness or willful blindness. Maybe Catherine knew exactly what her husband was. Maybe she'd been choosing comfort over truth for years. Either way, she'd given Angela 60 seconds. Just enough time to finish the download and clear the screen. 3 years of humiliation. 3 years of evidence. 3 years of playing the role of a woman who'd been erased. Then Richard announced his annual charity gala, his smile cruel and anticipatory as he told Catherine his plans. "I'm going to teach the help a lesson about stealing," he said, loud enough for Angela to hear from the hallway. "It'll be educational. Might even go viral." Angela kept scrubbing the floor, her face blank, her mind calculating. Finally, the stage was set. The accusation. The penthouse hummed with power. Tech moguls discussed billion-dollar acquisitions over caviar. Venture capitalists traded tips on offshore accounts. A senator's daughter posted selfies with #CharityGala while wearing diamonds worth more than Angela's mother's hospital bills. The orchestra played Vivaldi, champagne flowed like water, and 50 of Manhattan's elites celebrated their own magnificence under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Richard Halston stood at the center of it all, master of his universe, orchestrating the evening like a conductor. When he raised his hand for silence, conversations died instantly. Phones turned toward him, already recording, already hungry for content. "I apologize for interrupting," he began, his voice carrying that practiced tone of reluctant authority, "but I must address a serious breach of trust." His finger extended toward Angela like a sword. "This woman has stolen from me." The gasps were immediate, delicious. Richard produced the velvet box with the diamond watch, holding it up like evidence in a murder trial. "A family heirloom. Priceless. I found it hidden in her cleaning cart this afternoon." Angela stood perfectly still, her burgundy uniform suddenly feeling like a spotlight. Every eye in the room fixed on her with the same expression, a mixture of scandal-hungry fascination and self-righteous judgment. "Empty your pockets," Richard demanded, his voice hardening. "Now." "Richard, really?" Catherine Halston stepped forward, her champagne glass catching the light, her face arranged in practiced sympathy. "We gave you opportunities. We treated you like family. And this is how you repay our kindness." Her voice carried just enough disappointment to sound generous, just enough condescension to draw blood. The phones multiplied. Guests were already posting, already writing captions. "Caught red-handed at Halston Gala, and when charity backfires, and this is why you can't trust." Angela watched them all with eyes that held something Richard couldn't quite identify. Not fear. Not shame. Something else entirely. Something that made his confidence falter for just a microsecond before arrogance reasserted itself. "Well," he pressed, "what do you have to say for yourself? An apology? A confession?" The room leaned forward collectively, phones recording, waiting for tears, for begging, for the spectacle of a powerless woman breaking down before her betters. This was the content they'd come for. This was justice, Manhattan style. Angela set down her mop with deliberate precision. The soft sound of it touching marble echoed in the sudden silence. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her uniform, and when she spoke, her voice was calm as glass and sharp as a surgical blade. "Before I respond to these accusations," she said, meeting Richard's eyes with unsettling composure, "may I connect to your television, Mr. Halston? I have something everyone should see." Richard's smile widened. This was even better than he'd hoped. She was going to make a scene, try some desperate explanation that would only dig her grave deeper. "By all means," he said magnanimously, gesturing toward the massive screen mounted on the wall. "Let's see what excuse you've prepared." Angela pulled a small device from her pocket and approached the television. Her hands didn't shake. Her face showed no fear. And that should have warned him. She connected her phone to the screen, and when she turned to face the crowd, she spoke 4 words that changed everything. "My name is Dr. Angela Thompson." The revelation. The television screen blazed to life, and suddenly Angela Thompson's face filled the frame, not as she stood now in her burgundy uniform, but as she'd been 5 years ago. Young, brilliant, confident, wearing MIT graduation robes, holding a diploma, standing beside a proud woman with Angela's same eyes. The timestamp read, June 2019. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science. Angela's voice cut through the stunned silence. Specializing in artificial intelligence and adaptive neural networks. The next image appeared. Patent application documents, dense with technical specifications and mathematical formulas. This is Sentinel AI. I filed this patent on March 15, 2020. Her finger moved across the screen, highlighting dates, signatures, timestamps. Note the filing date. Then, side by side, 2 walls of code appeared. On the left, Sentinel AI. On the right, OptiCore. Angela let the silence stretch as tech executives in the crowd leaned forward, their expressions shifting from mockery to confusion to dawning horror. 99.7% match, Angela said quietly. Line for line. Variable for variable. With minor cosmetic changes to function names. She highlighted sections where the code was identical, where only comments had been altered, where Richard's team had barely bothered to hide the theft. A venture capitalist in the front row gasped. That's impossible. OptiCore launched in. He stopped, calculating. His face went pale. September 2020, Angela confirmed. 6 months after I pitched Sentinel to Halston Technologies. 6 months after Richard told me my work was not commercially viable. Richard's face had gone from smug to ashen. This is absurd, he shouted, but his voice cracked. She's a disgruntled former applicant trying to. I was never an applicant, Mr. Halston. Angela's voice remained eerily calm, surgical in its precision. I was a founder. I was a CEO. I was a daughter who buried her mother because the stress of watching you destroy us stopped her heart. She advanced the presentation. And you were the man who stole everything I built. The emails appeared on screen, and the room erupted in whispers. Richard's name blazed at the top, his corporate email address unmistakable. Use the Thompson algorithm. Make the changes minimal. She's broke, she'll never afford to fight us. The Sentinel architecture is exactly what we need for OptiCore. Acquisition complete. If Thompson tries legal action, bury her in motions. She can't outlast our legal team. Catherine Halston's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Richard, she whispered. My God. What did you do? The guests' phones were still recording, but now the captions were changing, being deleted, being rewritten. Tech journalists in the crowd were already typing furiously. Board members were making urgent phone calls. The senator's daughter had stopped taking selfies. Richard looked around wildly, seeing his world crumbling in real time. This is fabricated. Security. He pointed at Angela, his hand shaking. Remove this woman from my home immediately. Angela didn't move, didn't flinch, just waited. And then, from the crowd of formally dressed guests, a man in a waiter's uniform set down his tray and reached into his jacket. FBI agent Marcus Chen pulled out his badge, letting it catch the light. Mr. Halston, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. I'm afraid you're not in a position to be giving orders right now. The murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd, but it was the federal badge that turned whispers into silence. FBI, Mr. Halston. Special Agent Marcus Chen. The agent's voice carried across the ballroom with practiced authority as he displayed his credentials and a folded warrant. "We have questions regarding patent fraud and corporate espionage." Richard's carefully maintained composure flickered. "This is absurd. Security." "Don't." Angela's voice cut through his bluster as she stepped forward, a sleek folder in her hands. The same hands that had once trembled signing away her company now moved with absolute certainty. "Let me save everyone some time." She opened the folder, and Richard's face went white. "Patent filing dates," Angela began, her voice steady as she displayed the first documents to the crowd pressing closer. "Mine submitted 14 months before Richard's. Certified and time-stamped." She turned to the next section. "Corporate espionage documentation. Emails from Halston Tech employees, your employees, Richard, detailing systematic theft of my proprietary research." Her fingers moved through the pages with surgical precision. Witness testimonies from 3 former engineers who couldn't live with what they'd participated in. Financial records showing how Halston Tech buried my startup in predatory litigation while stealing the very technology you claimed to protect. The projection screen behind her suddenly blazed to life. Someone from Angela's team had taken control. A video began playing, a middle-aged man in a Halston Tech polo shirt, his face gaunt with guilt. "My name is David Reeves. I was lead engineer on the neural processing project at Halston Tech. Everything I'm about to say is true, and I'm prepared to testify under oath." He took a shaking breath. "Richard Halston ordered us to reverse engineer Angela Reeves' technology after acquiring access through the settlement agreement. He committed perjury before the patent office, claiming original invention when he knew it was hers. He knew, and he did it anyway." Catherine Halston's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the sudden silence. She turned to her husband, her face transforming from confusion to comprehension to devastation in the space of a heartbeat. "Richard." Her voice barely registered above a whisper, but the betrayal in it carried. "What did you do?" Board members materialized around Richard like sharks scenting blood. "We need to talk. Now. My clients are going to have serious concerns. The optics of this are catastrophic." Phones emerged from pockets and clutches across the ballroom. An investor near the bar announced without looking up from his screen, "Halston Tech down 8% in after-hours trading." Then 12. Then 15. The numbers kept falling. On screens throughout the room, social media exploded. Hashtag Richard Halston Exposed climbed trending lists in real time, each refresh showing thousands more posts, articles being published, takedowns being written by the same journalists who'd lauded him hours earlier. Richard looked at the evidence, at his wife's stricken face, at the investors already calculating their exit strategies. "I can explain this." His voice cracked on the words. "This is a coordinated attack, corporate sabotage." With an FBI warrant. Agent Chen raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Halston, I'd suggest you stop talking and contact your attorney." Angela closed the folder. Around her, the guests who'd laughed at her humiliation now couldn't meet her eyes. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, fierce certainty that justice was finally being served. Richard pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. One last desperate play to control the narrative, to spin this catastrophe into something salvageable. He had no idea he was about to make everything infinitely worse. Richard's denials came faster now, each one more frantic than the last. "These documents are fabricated. Angela's been planning this vendetta for years. You can't possibly believe." His words tumbled over themselves, coherence dissolving with each syllable. "Enough." Catherine's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. She stood perfectly still, her posture impeccable even as her world shattered. "I want a divorce, Richard." Every head turned toward her. "I won't be married to a criminal." Richard's phone buzzed insistently in his hand. Then again. And again. His face went ashen as he glanced at the screen. "My children," he whispered. His adult son and daughter, learning the truth not from their father but from Twitter trends watched by millions. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her hands shaking but her voice clear. I worked in R&D at Halston Tech for 6 years. He made me sign an NDA after I questioned the origin of the neural processing code. Another voice joined hers. Then another. Former employees emerging like ghosts, unburdening themselves of secrets they'd carried too long. A distinguished man in his 60s approached Agent Chen, his patent lawyer credentials prominently displayed. I've reviewed the algorithms in question. The code Angela Reeves developed contains proprietary markers, unique inefficiencies that prove authorship. Halston Tech's version contains those exact same markers. It's not parallel development. It's theft. The board members didn't bother with privacy. They formed a tight circle around Richard right there on the ballroom floor. Effective immediately, you're removed as CEO, the chairman announced, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Security will escort you from all Halston Tech properties by morning. Agent Chen stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral. Richard Halston, you're being charged with fraud, corporate espionage, perjury before a federal office, and racketeering under the RICO Act. No. Richard's composure finally shattered completely. He whirled on Angela, his face contorted with rage and desperation. You were nothing. A cleaning lady. You push a mop for a living. The ballroom went deathly quiet. Angela met his eyes with a calm that seemed to draw strength from his breakdown. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. No, Richard. You made me invisible. You and people like you looked right through me because of what I wore, what I did to survive. She took a single step closer. But I was always brilliant. I was always capable. I was always worthy. Another step. You just couldn't see it. And that blindness is what destroyed you. Richard's knees seemed to give out slightly. Around them, cameras flashed. Not the curated publicity shots he'd orchestrated earlier, but something far more damning. The fall of an empire, captured in real time. Agent Chen moved with practiced efficiency, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Mr. Halston, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed through the ballroom like a final verdict. The perp walk through Richard Halston's own gala would become one of the most replayed moments in business history. Agent Chen guided him through the crowd that parted like water, every phone raised, every camera capturing the moment a titan fell. Richard kept his head down, but there was nowhere to hide. Not anymore. Outside, media trucks lined the street 3 deep, satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters shouted questions that blurred together into white noise as Richard was led toward the waiting vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back, his tuxedo somehow making the whole scene more devastating. By morning, Angela's story had exploded across every platform. The video of her revelation, standing in that penthouse in her cleaning uniform, revealing the truth with quiet dignity, had been watched 50 million times in 24 hours. The same guests who'd filmed her humiliation now scrambled to post apologies, to distance themselves from their own cruelty. Their sudden sympathy rang hollow, but Angela noticed it nonetheless. Catherine Halston found her near the windows, away from the remaining crowd. She looked smaller somehow, her designer gown unable to hide the weight of complicity she now carried. I'm so sorry. Catherine's voice was barely audible. I saw the files once. Richard explained them away, and I... She paused, tears threatening her carefully maintained composure. I told myself it couldn't be true. I chose comfort over truth. I chose my life over yours. Angela looked at this woman who had everything and lost it all in a single evening. She could have unleashed the anger she'd carried for 3 years. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Compassion. You can choose differently now, Angela said simply. The reporters caught Angela as she left the building. They swarmed with microphones and cameras, hungry for the sound bite that would define this moment. Angela stopped, straightened her shoulders, and spoke directly into the lenses. This isn't just about me, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. This is about every innovator who's been crushed by corporate theft. Every person whose ideas were stolen because they didn't have the resources to fight back. Every voice that's been silenced because someone more powerful decided their work was worth stealing. She paused, letting her words settle. Today isn't revenge. It's a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. The cameras followed her as she walked away from the penthouse she'd cleaned for 3 years. But this time, she didn't slip out the service entrance in the pre-dawn darkness. She walked through the front doors, her head high, her uniform still on but transformed somehow into armor rather than invisibility. Behind her, the building's lights blazed against the night sky, a monument to wealth and power that had just learned a devastating lesson. Ahead of her, the city stretched out with infinite possibility. 50 million people now knew her name, knew her story, knew what she'd accomplished. Her technology was hers again, legally and publicly. The patent lawyers were already reaching out. Investors who'd ignored her before were suddenly very interested. Angela Reeves had spent 3 years invisible. Now the whole world was watching to see what she'd do next. The federal judge's voice echoed through the courtroom with finality. 12 years for fraud, corporate espionage, and perjury. Richard Halston, once celebrated on magazine covers, would spend the next dozen years in a cell barely larger than the closets in his former penthouse. Angela sat in the gallery, her expression neutral as the civil settlement was read into the record. $500 million. Full patent rights restored. The number was staggering, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the acknowledgement, the official record that she had been right all along. Halston Technologies' board approached her 3 times with offers to join them, to help rebuild the company's shattered reputation. She declined each time with the same quiet firmness. She had other plans. The Thompson Innovation Fund launched on a Tuesday morning with a simple mission statement and $100 million in initial funding. Angela had taken her mother's maiden name for it, a tribute to the woman who'd worked 2 jobs so her daughter could dream. The fund would protect marginalized inventors, provide legal defense against corporate theft, and level a playing field that had been tilted toward power and privilege for far too long. Her team reflected the world she wanted to build. Former cleaning staff from Manhattan's elite homes sat in executive positions alongside MIT graduates. A woman who'd scrubbed toilets at a hedge fund now ran Angela's patent protection division. A man who'd worked nights as a janitor at a law firm now headed legal operations. When Angela testified before the Congressional Committee on Technology Industry Reform, senators from both parties listened. Her recommendations became the framework for the Innovation Protection Act, bipartisan legislation designed to protect individual inventors from predatory corporate practices. The prison visit surprised her legal team, but Angela insisted. She owed Richard nothing, but she owed herself closure. He looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit, his tan faded, his confidence gone. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't understand what I was taking from you. Your future, my present," Angela corrected quietly. "You took my present. But you couldn't take my future. That was always mine. Can you forgive me?" She considered the question, really considered it. "I forgive you for my own peace, Richard. Not for yours. And you'll serve every day of that sentence." 6 months later, Angela stood at the podium in MIT's Kresge Auditorium, the same space where Richard had delivered the commencement address 5 years earlier, speaking about innovation and integrity to graduates who hung on his every word. The standing ovation began before she even spoke. She waited for silence, then leaned toward the microphone. "Never let anyone convince you that you're invisible," she began, her voice steady and strong. "Document everything. Back up your work. Timestamp your innovations. Believe in your own brilliance even when the world tells you you're not worthy of the room you're standing in." She paused, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. "And know that justice, though slow, is inevitable when you have truth on your side." The applause thundered through the auditorium. In the third row, a young black woman in a graduation gown clutched her electrical engineering textbook to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She'd heard the stories, seen the videos, followed every moment of the trial. And now, watching Angela Reeves command that stage, she knew what was possible. Angela caught her eye and smiled. The greatest revenge, she'd learned, isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so extraordinary that their betrayal becomes nothing but a footnote in your triumph story. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do click it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.